Have you ever witnessed a love so powerful it defies all logic? A loyalty so fierce it pushes a body past its breaking point? Picture this: a lone German shepherd on an endless road at sunset. Her leg shattered, her body failing, yet she presses on. In her mouth, she carries her entire world, her last surviving pup. Her story is a testament to a mother's silent vow. Before we uncover the fate that awaits her at the end of this desperate mile, if you believe her courage deserves to be honored, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so that stories of a love this profound are never forgotten. The sun bled across the peaks of the Bridger Mountains, painting the vast Montana sky in violent strokes of orange and bruised purple. Down below, Highway 191 was a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through an endless sea of sagebrush and silence. For Jacob Miller, this silence was a currency he had paid dearly to acquire. It was the only thing that could quiet the echoes in his head, the ghosts of sand and shouting that clung to him like the dust on his dashboard. His Ford F-150, a machine as old and reliable as his own demons, was the only world he needed. Its steady rumble was a predictable rhythm in a life he fought to keep free of surprises. Jake's hands rested on the steering wheel, calloused and steady, a map of old scars across the knuckles. A faded bulldog tattoo, the emblem of the Marine Corps, peeked from the rolled-up sleeve of his flannel shirt. At 32, his face was leaner than it should have been, framed by dark hair that was just beginning to lose its military discipline. His eyes, a deep and guarded blue, held the unnerving stillness of a man who had seen too much and was now determined to see as little as possible. They scanned the horizon out of habit, a constant, low-level threat assessment that the open plains of Montana had yet to disarm. It was in that practice scan that he saw it. At first, it was just a distortion in the heat haze, shimmering off the road ahead, a dark speck against the setting sun, a coyote maybe, or a deer that had lost its way. But as the truck devoured the distance, the shape resolved itself with a jarring clarity that made Jake's foot ease off the accelerator. It was a dog, and it was limping badly. He slowed the truck to a crawl, the engine's rumble dropping to a low growl. The dog was a German shepherd, its classic black and tan coat matted with filth and burrs, clinging to a frame that was far too thin. One of its hind legs was held completely off the ground, useless and bent at an unnatural angle. Every third step was a painful, jarring hop, a testament to an agony Jake could only imagine. Yet, it pressed on with a relentless determination that sent a strange jolt through him. This wasn't the wandering of a lost pet. This was a mission. Then he saw what it was carrying. Held with an impossible gentleness in its jaws was a small bundle, a tiny, motionless pup. The mother's head was held high, her neck muscles taut with the strain of her precious cargo, even as her body faltered with every step. Her focus was absolute, fixed on the horizon, as if she could see a destination that was invisible to him. A cold knot formed in Jake's stomach. He had seen that look before. He'd seen it in the eyes of young Marines in Fallujah, men who refused to leave a fallen comrade behind, their own bodies screaming in protest. It was the look of duty, of a love so fierce it eclipsed all suffering. It was a look he understood on a cellular level, and one he had come to this empty corner of the world to forget. He pulled the truck over to the gravel shoulder, the crunch of the tires sounding like an explosion in the immense quiet. The engine ticked as it cooled. He watched, his breath held tight in his chest. The shepherd stopped. Her head turned, and for a moment her dark, intelligent eyes met his through the windshield. Fear flickered within them, a primal terror of the human and the machine. He saw her body tense, the instinct to flee, warring with the exhaustion that was pulling her into the earth. She turned away from him, facing the long, empty road ahead once more. She took one more staggering hop, then another. Her body swayed violently. He saw the tremor run through her, a final, catastrophic failure of will and sinew. But even as she fell, in that last second of consciousness, she did something that shattered the quiet fortress of Jake's heart. With a final, deliberate movement of her head, she gently placed the puppy down onto a soft patch of grass by the roadside. Only when her child was safe did she allow her own body to surrender. She collapsed in a heap beside it, a silent, unmoving testament to the last full measure of a mother's devotion. The world rushed back in with the slam of the truck door. For a long moment, Jacob Miller simply stood on the gravel shoulder, the cool evening air a sharp sting in his lungs. The silence he had cultivated so carefully was gone, replaced by the deafening sight of the fallen mother and her child. His mind, a place he usually kept locked down tight, was suddenly flooded with a tide of old protocols, of training he had tried to leave behind in the dust of another country. The paralysis broke. He began to move, not with hesitation, but with the quiet, deliberate economy of a man whose body remembered a mission even if his heart wanted to forget. He approached her sideways, keeping his profile low and non-threatening. Each step was slow, measured, his boots making almost no sound on the dry earth. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble he hadn't used in years. It was the voice reserved for spooked horses and nervous soldiers, a sound meant to convey calm when the world was anything but. "You're all right. I'm right here. You did good." He knelt beside her, his gaze taking in everything at once. Her breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper against the immense quiet of the plains. The leg was worse than he'd thought. The flesh around a deep, jagged gash was swollen, and an angry, inflamed red, the unmistakable sign of a raging infection. He gently laid a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tremor of a fever beneath the coarse fur. Her eyes fluttered open, just for a second. They were glazed with pain and exhaustion, but in their depths he saw it again, that unwavering, unconquerable will. It was the loyal heart of a warrior who had completed her objective at any cost. His own heart clenched with a familiar ache. He was suddenly back in the suffocating heat, the memory of another German shepherd, his partner, Lex, whose eyes held that same loyal fire. A dog who had twice dragged him to safety, who had been a steady, warm presence in a world of chaos. Looking at this female, this unknown soldier on a lonely highway, Jake felt the weight of a debt he could never repay. In the quiet of the Montana dusk, he made a silent vow. He would not let this one fall. Not on his watch. His focus shifted to the pup. It was impossibly small, a tiny mound of black and tan fluff nestled in the grass. He touched it with 2 fingers, a gesture of profound gentleness. Its body was cool to the touch, too cool, and he could feel the faint, frantic flutter of a heartbeat that was struggling to keep its rhythm. The pup's life was a fragile flicker, a candle flame that the slightest breeze could extinguish. Its vulnerability made the mother's sacrifice all the more profound. Jake rose and walked back to his truck with purpose. From a worn duffel bag on the passenger seat, he pulled out a comprehensive first aid kit, a habit he'd never broken. He returned to Freya's side, his movements now swift and sure. "All right, girl," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Let's get you patched up for the ride." He cleaned the wound as best he could with antiseptic wipes, his touch firm but gentle. She flinched, but didn't have the strength to resist. He then wrapped the leg carefully with a pressure bandage, not to heal it, but to keep it clean and supported. The hardest part was moving her. He slid his arms beneath her, one under her chest, the other under her hips, and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, a dead weight of bone and muscle. He carried her to the truck, and laid her on an old thick wool blanket he kept on the back seat. He then returned for the pup, cradling its tiny, limp body in his large hands with a tenderness that felt foreign to him. He placed the pup right against its mother's belly, nestled in the curve of her body where she could feel its presence. He closed the rear door with a soft click and got back into the driver's seat. The cab of the truck, once his solitary sanctuary, now felt crowded with the weight of 2 lives. He turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. He didn't look back at the empty spot on the roadside. There was nothing for him there anymore. He pulled onto the highway and pointed the truck toward the distant twinkling lights of the nearest town. His mission had begun. The miles dissolved under the steady rhythm of the tires on asphalt. Inside the cab, Jacob Miller drove with a focus he hadn't summoned in years, his eyes flicking between the dark road ahead and the rearview mirror. In its reflection, he could see the huddled forms on the back seat, a small tableau of suffering and devotion. He kept his voice low, a constant, calming murmur that filled the space between them. "Just hang on, girl. We're getting close now. You hear me? We're almost there." He didn't know if she understood the words, but he knew she understood the tone. It was the sound of assurance, a promise in the dark. For her part, the German shepherd he had named Freya lay mostly still, her body a dead weight on the wool blanket, but her spirit was not still. Despite the fever that raged through her and the pain that throbbed in her leg, her gaze remained fixed on the tiny pup nestled against her. Every slight jostle of the truck, every turn in the road, drew a faint, anxious whine from her throat. Her mission wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until her child was safe. The lights of Bozeman grew from a faint glimmer to a welcoming glow. Jake followed the signs for the 24-hour emergency clinic, pulling into the parking lot of the Big Sky Veterinary Clinic. The building was a beacon of clean, sterile light against the deep Montana night. He worked quickly, first carrying Freya's limp form inside, then rushing back for the precious, fragile bundle she had protected. The moment he stepped through the glass doors, the clean smell of antiseptic hit him. A young woman in blue scrubs at the front desk, her name tag reading Sarah, looked up with practiced calm that faltered slightly at the sight of the bloodied, exhausted dog in Jake's arms. Before she could speak, a man emerged from a back room. He was in his late 50s, with graying hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a calm, competent air. This was Dr. Evans. "Miller," the vet said, his voice steady as he took in the scene. "It's been a while. What have you got here?" "Found her on the highway, Doc. Her and the pup," Jake said, his voice strained. "She's in a bad way." Dr. Evans didn't waste a second. "Sarah, get exam room 2 ready. Let's get her in here." He led the way, his movements efficient and sure. Jake gently placed Freya on the cool metal of the examination table. Dr. Evans's hands were expert as they moved over her, checking her vitals, his expression growing more serious by the second. "High fever, tachycardia. This leg wound is deeply infected. We need to get her on IV antibiotics immediately, or she'll go septic." He then turned his attention to the puppy Jake held cradled in his arms. The vet took the tiny body, his large hands seeming to swallow it whole. "He's cold, Jake. Dangerously cold. Severe hypothermia and dehydration." He looked Jake straight in the eye. "The pup's chances are slim. We need to get him into an incubator on warming fluids right now. The mother. The infection is advanced. We'll do everything we can." At the mention of her pup, Freya stirred on the table. A low, guttural growl of protest rumbled in her chest as Sarah gently moved to take the puppy. She tried to lift her head, her body trembling with a desperate protective instinct. "Whoa, easy girl," Jake said, moving to her side instantly. He placed a firm, steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, they're helping him. I'm right here. I'm not leaving." She looked at him, her pain-filled eyes searching his for the truth. The growl subsided into a pathetic whine, a sound of utter helplessness. She watched as they carried her son away into another room, her last ounce of strength seeming to leave with him. The team worked around her, hooking up the IV, cleaning her wound more thoroughly. Once she was stabilized, Dr. Evans said, "We'll keep her here in the main treatment area where we can monitor her." Jake shook his head. "Can she stay in here for a bit, just until the shock wears off?" Dr. Evans looked from the exhausted man to the broken dog, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "All right, For a little while. When the vet and his tech had gone, leaving the room in a heavy silence broken only by the soft beep of the IV pump, Jake didn't take the chair in the corner. Instead, he slid down the cool, sterile wall and sat on the linoleum floor a few feet from the table. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. He just stayed. He was a sentinel, a soldier standing watch alongside another. In that quiet room, two warriors, battered and scarred by their own private wars, sat together in a silent vigil, waiting for news from a battle neither of them could fight. The journey back from the vet clinic marked the beginning of a fragile truce. Jake's cabin, once a fortress of solitude, was now a quiet recovery ward. Near the stone hearth, a makeshift nest of old blankets held the tiny sleeping form of the pup, Coda. He had survived the critical first 48 hours, his life, a testament to Dr. Evans's skill and his own tenacious spark. And watching over him, a constant, silent guardian, was Freya. She never strayed more than a few feet from her son, her body, a living wall between him and the world. But it was a world that still included Jake, and she made it clear he was not yet a trusted part of it. The physical wounds were healing. The angry inflammation in Freya's leg had subsided to a clean, healing line, and Coda grew stronger with each passing day. The other wounds, the ones that left no visible trace, were far deeper. Jake learned this one evening when a log shifted in the fireplace, sending a heavy piece of oak tumbling onto the stone hearth with a loud crack. The sound was harmless, ordinary, but Freya reacted as if a gunshot had echoed through the small cabin. In an instant, she flattened herself to the floor, her body trembling violently, a low, terrified whine caught in her throat. Her ears were pinned back against her skull, and her eyes were wide with a terror that was completely out of proportion to the event. The sound, and her reaction, sent a phantom shockwave through Jake. His own heart hammered against his ribs, his senses suddenly on high alert. For a split second, he wasn't in his Montana cabin. He was back in the suffocating dust, the air thick with the memory of explosions. He recognized the look in her eyes because he had felt it in his own soul. It was the frantic, desperate search for a threat that was no longer there, the phantom pain of an old wound. She wasn't just a stray who was shy around people. She had been hurt by them, badly. Looking at her cowering form, Jake didn't feel frustration or impatience. He felt a profound, gut-wrenching empathy. He was looking in a mirror. From that day on, a new, unspoken routine began. Jake moved through his own home like a guest, his actions slow and deliberate. He learned to make noise before entering a room, to avoid sudden movements, to keep his voice at a low, even pitch. He spent hours in his worn leather armchair by the fire, reading a book or simply staring into the flames, creating a bubble of calm, predictable presence. He wasn't demanding anything from her, not a touch, not a tail wag, not even a glance. He was just sharing the space, giving her time to learn that his hands would not strike, that his voice would not yell. It was a slow, quiet negotiation, a battle fought with patience instead of force. For days, she simply watched him, her gaze a heavy, calculating weight in the quiet room. She was an analyst, studying his every move, searching for the inevitable betrayal she had been taught to expect. One night, as a gentle snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in an even deeper silence, Jake set his book aside. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and Coda's soft, sleeping breaths. He looked over at Freya, who lay in her usual spot, alert and watchful. He didn't speak to her directly, but rather into the warm, dancing heart of the fire. "He was a good boy, you know," Jake began, his voice softer than he'd intended. "My partner Lex, another shepherd just like you, but stubborn, so stubborn." A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "He could track a scent through a sandstorm, but he could never learn not to steal my socks." He kept talking, his voice a low, steady murmur. He spoke of their bond, of the unspoken trust between a handler and his dog in a place where trust was the only thing that kept you alive. He told her about the time Lex had found him buried in rubble, about the comforting weight of his head on Jake's chest while they waited for rescue. He wasn't asking for a response. He was simply opening a door to his own past, sharing the story of a sacred bond. Freya didn't move from her spot, but as he spoke, something in her posture began to change. The rigid tension in her shoulders eased. Her ears, which had been fixed on him like radar dishes, softened and swiveled toward the fire. She listened not to the words, but to the deep well of love and loss that colored his tone. When he finally fell silent, she laid her head down on her paws, and for the first time since entering his home, she let out a long, slow sigh. It wasn't a sound of fear or sadness. It was a sound of release. The wall around her heart had not yet crumbled, but a single, crucial stone had just been loosened. The passing weeks unspooled like a healing bandage. As the last of the Montana snow melted from the high meadows, a new energy began to fill the quiet cabin. It was Coda. No longer a fragile, shivering bundle, he had erupted into a clumsy, chaotic whirlwind of puppy energy. He was the bridge between the two silent adults in the house, a force of pure, untainted joy that refused to acknowledge the shadows of the past. One afternoon, he discovered an old, frayed rope toy, a forgotten relic of Lex's, tucked away in a corner. He pounced on it, wrestling it with a series of ferocious, happy growls. He tried to entice his mother into the game, nudging the toy against her nose. Freya, who for weeks had been a stoic, watchful guardian, merely tolerated his antics at first. But the puppy was relentless. He tumbled over her paws and chewed playfully on her tail until finally something deep within her shifted. A low, playful rumble surfaced in her chest, and she nudged him back with her snout, a gesture that sent Coda into a frenzy of delight. Jake watched from his armchair, a genuine smile reaching his eyes for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The sound of Freya's quiet play was the sound of ice breaking. The true test of their unspoken pact, however, came not in the light of day, but in the deepest part of the night. Sleep was rarely a peaceful country for Jake. It was a treacherous landscape of half-remembered sounds and sudden, heart-stopping falls. On this night, the ghosts were particularly loud. He was trapped in a dream of collapsing walls and choking dust, his own voice a choked cry lost in the chaos. He thrashed in his bed, his hands clenching the sheets, caught in a war that had ended years ago but would never truly leave him. Across the room, Freya's head snapped up from where she lay beside a sleeping Coda. Her ears swiveled, pinpointing the source of the distress sounds. She heard the fear in her human's voice, a raw terror that transcended species. For a long, tense moment, she was frozen. Her instincts screamed at her to stay, to guard her pup. It was her single, driving purpose. But the sounds from the bed, the broken, desperate gasps for air, pulled at something deeper, a newer instinct she was only just beginning to understand. It was loyalty. She made a choice. Leaving the safety of her sleeping son, she rose silently and padded across the wooden floor. She paused at the side of the bed, her intelligent eyes watching the man's tormented sleep. Then she rested her heavy paws on the edge of the mattress and pushed her head forward, nudging his thrashing hand with her cold, wet nose. Jake's eyes flew open, his heart racing. He was disoriented, the dream clinging to him like a shroud. But the solid, persistent pressure on his hand was real. He blinked, and in the pale moonlight filtering through the window, he saw her. Freya was leaning over him, her dark eyes filled not with fear or need, but with a calm, steady concern. She whined softly, a low question in her throat. Then she did something that anchored his spinning world. She rested her great, noble head directly on his chest. The solid weight of her, the warmth of her breath, was a tether to the here and now. It was the cabin. It was Montana. It was safe. The last vestiges of the nightmare dissolved under her comforting presence. He realized with a stunning clarity that she had left her child to come to him. The rescued had become the rescuer. A wave of emotion so powerful, it stole his breath, washed over him. He wrapped his arms around her strong neck and buried his face in her thick fur, and for the first time since he had come home from the war, he did not feel alone in his fight. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. They walked a trail that wound up the hill behind the cabin, the three of them. Coda, full of boundless life, bounded ahead, chasing grasshoppers and tumbling through the tall grass. But Freya walked at Jake's side, her gait now even and strong, her position one of a confident partner, not a fearful dependent. Jake watched them, the morning sun warming his face. The crushing weight of the past was still there, but it no longer defined his horizon. He looked at the proud mother at his side, and the joyful pup exploring the world ahead, and he understood. His mission in the sand was over. A new one had just begun. His purpose was no longer to simply survive his memories, but to protect the future of this small, resilient pack. He was their leader, their guardian, their family, and as they moved forward together into the light, their three forms cast a single, unbroken shadow on the path ahead. The story of Jake, Freya, and Coda teaches us a quiet but profound truth. Sometimes the family we build is the one that rebuilds us. A rescue is never just a single act, but a silent promise that flows both ways, healing the rescuer just as much as the rescued. There are countless tales like theirs etched in the world, stories of quiet courage and unwavering loyalty waiting to be told. If you believe in the power of these bonds and wish to honor the spirit of these noble companions, we hope you'll join our pack by subscribing and continue to follow their paw prints on our shared journey.